My name is Frank Doyle. I'm 45 years old. I run a construction company outside Columbus, Ohio, the same one my father started with a single truck and a set of hand tools back in 1979. I build things. Additions, kitchens, whole houses from the foundation up. My hands are rough, my boots are always dusty, and for 20 years that never bothered anybody. My wife, Carol, passed away when our kids were still young. Ryan was 12. Megan was 9. I raised them mostly on my own after that, with help from my sister Donna on the bad weeks. I coached Little League on Saturdays and did estimates on Sunday nights after they went to bed. I never remarried, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't want to bring anyone into their lives who wasn't going to stay. Carol used to tell me, back before she got sick, that the measure of a man wasn't what he built for himself. It was what he built for the people who'd still be standing there after he was gone. I never forgot that. I paid for Ryan's engineering degree at Ohio State without loans. I paid for Megan's 2 years at community college and then her transfer to a 4-year school also without loans. I never told them exactly how. I just told them not to worry about the money and to worry about their grades instead. That was my job, I figured. Carry the weight so they didn't have to. There were winters I skipped new work boots so tuition checks would clear on time. I never mentioned that either. A father doesn't keep a ledger of his sacrifices and hand it to his kids later like a bill. By the time Ryan turned 28, he was working at a mid-sized engineering firm downtown, wearing button-down shirts I didn't recognize and talking about networking and optics like they were sacred words. Megan, 25, was in marketing, dating a man named Preston whose family owned half the office parks in the county. Ryan had gotten engaged that spring to a woman named Vanessa, whose father, Gerald Whitfield, ran a real estate investment firm downtown. Big glass building. His name on it in brushed steel letters. The Whitfields didn't just have money. They had the kind of comfort with money that made everyone else in the room feel like they were still counting their change. The engagement party was held at the Whitfield estate, a stone house set back from the road with a circular driveway and a fountain that actually worked. I wore my one good suit, the navy one I bought for Carol's funeral, because it was the only suit I owned that fit right. I brought a card with more cash in it than I probably should have, because that's what a father does. I want to be honest with you. I felt out of place the second I walked in, not because anyone said anything yet, just because of the way people looked at my hands when they shook them. 20 years of framing houses does something to a man's hands that a manicure never will. A woman near the coat check glanced at my knuckles, then at my suit, then back at my knuckles, like she was doing arithmetic she didn't want to say out loud. I found Ryan by the bar, laughing with 3 men in expensive jackets. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Hey, bud, this place is something else." He turned, and for just a second, something flickered across his face that I chose not to name yet. Then he smiled the smile he uses for clients. "Dad, glad you made it." Glad you made it, like I was a coworker who RSVP'd late. I want you to understand something before I go further. I'm not a man who goes looking for reasons to feel sorry for myself. I've buried a wife. I've rebuilt a business from nothing after the 2009 crash nearly took it. I know the difference between a bad moment and a real wound. What happened next was a wound. Gerald Whitfield gathered everyone near the fireplace for a toast. He talked about Vanessa, about family, about legacy. Then he turned to Ryan and asked him to say a few words about his own family. "For context," he said, smiling like he already knew something the rest of us didn't. Ryan cleared his throat. He thanked the Whitfields for welcoming him. He talked about hard work and how he'd built his career from the ground up. Then he said this, and I remember every word of it because I've replayed it more times than I can count. "My dad worked construction his whole life, swinging a hammer, you know. It wasn't always easy growing up in that house, honestly. I think a lot of people here worked hard to get where they are, but they also knew where they were going. My dad just worked. He never really had ambition beyond the next job. I think that's part of why I pushed myself so hard to get somewhere different." A few people laughed, the polite kind of laugh people give when they're not sure if something was a joke. I stood there with a glass of sparkling cider in my hand, in the suit I wore to bury my wife, and I felt my whole chest go quiet. Megan was standing near Preston's family, and she didn't defend me. She didn't even look at me. She looked embarrassed, but not for Ryan, for herself, for being associated with me in that room. Then Vanessa, trying to be kind in the worst possible way, patted my arm and said, "Don't worry, Mr. Doyle, we don't judge people based on what they do for a living." I set my glass down on the mantel. I said, "Excuse me," to no one in particular, and I walked out to my truck. I didn't slam the door. I didn't call anyone that night. I drove home, sat in my kitchen, and looked around at the house I built with my own hands after Carol died, the house where I taught both of my kids to ride bikes in the driveway, and I made a decision that had nothing to do with anger. I decided I was done explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. For the next few weeks, I didn't reach out. Ryan texted twice, short things like, "Hey, you good?" I answered politely and left it there. Megan didn't text at all. My sister Donna called me every few days, worried, telling me I needed to have it out with them. I told her I wasn't interested in having it out with anyone. I was interested in something quieter. Donna came by one Sunday with a casserole she didn't need to bring and sat across from me at the kitchen table. The same table Carol picked out at a farm auction 20 years ago. "You've gone quiet, Frank. I know that quiet. That's the quiet you got after the funeral." "I'm fine, Donna." "You're not fine. You're building something in that head of yours. I can always tell." She wasn't wrong, but I wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, not even to my own sister. Here's a piece of information nobody at that party knew, including my own children. 9 years ago, right after the recession nearly wiped out Doyle Construction, I restructured the business with the help of an old friend of mine, a retired attorney named Walter Simmons. Walter had drafted the original partnership agreements when my father handed the company to me. When I rebuilt the business from almost nothing, Walter helped me set it up so that ownership was airtight, protected, and entirely mine, with a very specific succession clause that neither of my children knew existed. That clause said this: any child of mine who wished to inherit an ownership stake in Doyle Construction had to work in the business for a minimum of 3 years, demonstrating both competence and character, as judged solely by me and confirmed by an independent board of 2 outside advisors. Otherwise, upon my death or retirement, the company and its assets would be liquidated and the proceeds split evenly, with a portion going to a scholarship fund for trade school students, something Carol and I had talked about before she passed. Neither Ryan nor Megan had ever worked a single day for Doyle Construction. Ryan had made that clear years ago, telling me construction wasn't his path. I never held that against him. I wanted my kids to choose their own lives. But I also never told them what that choice would eventually cost them, because I never wanted money to be the reason they loved me or the reason they didn't. In the weeks after the party, small things started happening that I couldn't explain right away. Ryan's texts, when they came, had a strange formality to them, like he was choosing his words too carefully. He asked once, almost casually, whether I'd ever updated my will since Carol passed. I told him I hadn't thought much about it. He didn't ask again, but something in the way he let the subject drop too quickly stayed with me. Then Megan mentioned, during a short and stiff phone call that Ryan had been talking to Preston about, how these things usually get handled between families with a business involved. I asked her what things. She said she wasn't sure, that it was just wedding talk. I let it go at the time. I wish I hadn't waited as long as I did to start paying closer attention. About 6 weeks after the engagement party, Donna called me with something that changed the shape of everything. She'd had lunch with Megan, trying to smooth things over between us, and Megan let something slip. Ryan and Vanessa were planning the wedding for early fall at the Whitfield estate with over 200 guests, and Gerald Whitfield was quietly encouraging Ryan to make some smart moves before the wedding regarding what Gerald called future family assets. Donna didn't fully understand what that meant. I did. I called Walter Simmons that same night. "Frank," he said, "before you say anything else, I need to tell you something. About 3 weeks ago, my old office got a call. Someone requesting a copy of your original partnership and succession documents, claiming to be helping you update your estate planning." My stomach went cold. Who called? "A paralegal working for a firm downtown. Whitfield Capital Group is a client of theirs." I sat in my kitchen a long time that night, looking at the photo on my wall of Carol holding baby Megan, with 6-year-old Ryan grinning beside her, missing his front teeth. I thought about every Saturday morning I'd spent teaching that boy how to hold a hammer without smashing his own thumb, how patient I'd been, how proud I was the first time he drove a nail straight on his own. I want to be very clear about something. I did not fly into a rage. I did not call my son and scream at him. I did not drive to the Whitfield estate and demand answers. I have seen what rage does to families, and I decided a long time ago that I would never be the reason my children were afraid of me. Instead, I got quiet, quieter than I had ever been. I called Walter back the next morning and asked him to do exactly 2 things. First, formally confirm that no changes had been made to the succession documents, and lock the file completely, requiring my physical signature and a notarized affidavit for any future request. Second, find out who at that firm had made the call and why. I also drove out to Walter's office myself that week, the first time I'd been there in years. His office still smelled like old paper and coffee, the same as when he first sat me down at 29 years old and explained what it meant to actually own something outright. He pulled the original file, the one with my father's signature still on the bottom of the founding page, and set it on the desk between us. "You built something real here, Frank," he said. "Whatever happens with your kids, this company is protected exactly the way you wanted it. Nobody touches this without going through both of us." I appreciate that, Walter. I just never thought I'd need it protected from my own son. He didn't say anything to that. He just nodded, the way old friends do when there's nothing worth saying that would actually help. It took Walter 11 days. What he found broke something in me that took a while to put back together. The request had come from a young associate at the firm, working directly under a partner who did regular business with Gerald Whitfield. The associate had made the call using language suggesting she was acting on my behalf, with my knowledge. She wasn't. When Walter tracked down the actual origin of the request, it traced back to an email from Ryan's personal account to that associate, 3 days after the engagement party, asking her to look into what my dad's company might be worth, and whether there's a way to get things moving before the wedding, just in case things change. Just in case things change. I read that email Walter forwarded me probably 10 times. My son wasn't asking about the business because he wanted to build something with me. He was asking because he was afraid I might change my will out of anger, and he wanted to know what he stood to lose and whether there was a way to lock it in before I could. I sat with that for a long time. I won't lie to you and tell you it didn't hurt. It hurt more than the toast at the party. The toast was cruelty born from embarrassment. This was calculation. I remember sitting on my back porch that night with a cold cup of coffee I never drank, watching the same backyard where Ryan used to practice throwing a football with me every fall evening after school. I kept trying to find the exact moment where that boy became a man who would go behind my back to a lawyer instead of just picking up the phone and talking to his own father. I never found a single moment. I think it was 100 small moments, none of them big enough on their own to notice, until they added up into something I couldn't ignore anymore. I thought about the year Ryan turned 16 and asked me out of nowhere why I never wore a suit to his school events like some of the other dads. I told him I wore what I could afford, and he never brought it up again, but I saw the way he looked at Preston's father at a football game a few years later in a sport coat that probably cost more than my truck payment. I didn't think much of it at the time. Kids notice things. I figured he'd grow out of it. Looking back, I think I mistook his silence for acceptance, when really it was just him learning to hide what he felt from me. I also thought about something Carol used to say, back when the kids were small, and money was tighter than I ever let them see. She'd tell me that raising children wasn't about giving them everything you never had. It was about giving them the character to build their own things, even if what they built looked nothing like yours. I wondered, sitting there that night, whether I'd failed at that part of it, whether somewhere along the way Ryan had learned to measure his own worth by square footage and steel letters, instead of by what a person actually does with their life. But here's what I want you to understand about me, because it matters for what happened next. I didn't want revenge in the way people usually mean it. I didn't want to humiliate my son the way he'd humiliated me. I wanted the truth to exist in the open, where everyone could see it clearly, including him. I wanted him to have to look at what he'd done, without me saying a single angry word. So I started building something. Over the next 4 months, I did several things quietly, without telling anyone in my family, including Donna. First, I met with Walter and formally reaffirmed the succession clause exactly as it stood, with one addition. I asked Walter to draft a letter, to be read only in the event that either child challenged the estate or attempted to acquire information about company assets through improper means, explaining plainly what had happened and why the terms would not be changing in their favor. Second, I reached out to an old friend, Marcus Webb, who ran a nonprofit that trained young people from difficult backgrounds in the building trades. Marcus and I had talked for years about expanding his apprenticeship program. I told him I wanted to fund 3 new apprenticeship slots a year, permanently, starting immediately, funded through Doyle Construction. Not someday. Now. I wanted something good to come directly out of this, something that had nothing to do with anyone waiting for me to die. Marcus met me for coffee the week I told him. He'd known me since we were both 22 years old, hauling lumber for my father for $6 an hour. "You sure about this, Frank? That's a real commitment, not a one-time check." "I'm sure. I spent my whole life building something for people who might never want it. Feels like time to build something for people who actually will." Marcus laughed a little, the way old friends do when they recognize a decision that's already been made long before the conversation starts. "You know, Frank, your father would have liked this. He always said the trades saved more lives than people gave them credit for," said a boy with a steady hammer in his hand, rarely has time to get into real trouble. We shook on it right there at the coffee shop. No lawyers in the room, no paperwork yet, just 2 men who'd known each other longer than either of our marriages had lasted. The program launched that August, 3 months before the wedding, with a small announcement in the local trade paper and a modest ceremony at Marcus's training center. I didn't invite Ryan or Megan. It wasn't about them. It was about a 15-year-old girl from the East Side named Priya who cried when she got handed her first tool belt, and a boy named Devin who told me it was the first time an adult had ever told him he was good at something without wanting anything back in return. Standing in that room, shaking hands with kids who looked at me the way Ryan used to look at me before life got complicated, I understood something I hadn't fully let myself feel yet. I wasn't just protecting a company. I was deciding, quietly, what kind of legacy I actually wanted to leave, regardless of who chose to be part of it. Third, and this is the part I'm not entirely proud of, but I'll tell you anyway because this story is supposed to be honest. I hired a young apprentice that spring, a 19-year-old kid named Tyler who'd grown up in foster care and had never had a man in his life show him how to do anything with his hands. I taught him to frame walls the way my father taught me. Some Saturdays he came to my house and we worked on small projects together, and he asked me questions about tools and measurements and life that my own son had stopped asking me a decade ago. Tyler was clumsy at first, dropping nails, measuring wrong, embarrassed every time he made a mistake. I told him what my own father told me. A crooked cut isn't a failure. It's a lesson wearing work boots. He laughed the first time I said that, and something about hearing a young man laugh in my garage again reminded me why I still loved this work in the first place. I wasn't punishing Ryan by doing that. I want to be clear about that. I was reminding myself what fatherhood was actually for. There was a night that summer, maybe 2 months before the wedding, when Tyler asked me straight out why a man with a grown son of his own would spend his Saturdays teaching a stranger instead. I didn't have a clean answer for him right away. I just told him that sometimes the people you're supposed to teach aren't ready to learn yet, and sometimes the people ready to learn just show up at your door needing somebody to show them they matter. He didn't ask again after that, but I noticed he started showing up early every Saturday after, like he didn't want to waste a single minute of it. The wedding was set for the second Saturday in October at the Whitfield estate, the same house where the engagement party had been held. Megan called me in September, the first real conversation we'd had in months, asking if I was still coming. I told her I was. "Are you going to make it weird, Dad?" That question told me everything about how she'd remembered that night, not as something that happened to me, as something I might make weird by existing in the room. No, I told her. I'm going to come, and I'm going to be exactly who I've always been. There was a pause on the line, longer than it should have been. Dad, is everything okay? You've been different since the party. I'm fine, sweetheart. I've just been busy. I wasn't ready yet to tell her what I knew. I wanted her to see it happen the same way everyone else would, in the open, without warning, so no one could accuse me later of manipulating the moment behind the scenes. If I told Megan first, it would become gossip before it became truth. I wanted it to arrive clean. I arrived at the wedding in the same navy suit. I sat quietly through the ceremony. Ryan looked happy standing at the altar, and despite everything, some old, stubborn part of me was still proud of him, the way you're proud of a kid who used to fall off his bike and always got back on. Watching him say his vows, I thought about Carol, about how much she would have cried at the sight of her son getting married, and how much it would have broken her heart to hear what he'd said about me months earlier at that fireplace. At the reception, Gerald Whitfield stood to give a toast of his own. He talked about family legacies, about the Whitfield name, about building something that lasts generations. Then, in what I understood later was meant as a generous gesture, he turned toward me. Frank, I understand from Ryan that Doyle Construction has quite a legacy of its own. Any thoughts on how that legacy carries forward? The room turned toward me. Ryan's face went slightly pale, the way it used to when he was a kid and got caught in a small lie he thought no one would ever check. I stood up slowly. I wasn't nervous. I had thought about this exact moment for months, not planning to embarrass anyone but planning to finally tell the truth out loud. Legacy's an interesting word, I said. My father built this company with a truck and a toolbox, and he built it on one rule. You don't inherit respect. You earn it every single day with your hands and your word. I built it back up after it nearly died in 2009 on that same rule. I looked at Ryan, not with anger, but with something steadier. A few months ago, at Ryan's engagement party, I found out how some people in this family see what I've spent my whole life building. That's all right. People are allowed their opinions about a man who works with his hands. But I also found out more recently that someone very close to me reached out to a law firm to find out what my company was worth and how to secure it before I even had a chance to change my mind about anything. I hadn't been planning to change my mind about anything. I was just trying to build something good for my family. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. So I want to say clearly in front of everyone who matters to this family that Doyle Construction isn't for sale, and it isn't up for early collection either. It's a company built on trust, and it will go to whoever demonstrates they understand that. Starting this year, it's also funding 3 new apprenticeships annually for young people who never had a father around to teach them anything. That felt like the right way to spend a legacy. I raised my water glass. Congratulations, Ryan and Vanessa. I hope you build something as honest as what my father gave me. I sat down. I didn't look at Ryan again that night. I didn't need to see his face. I'd said what needed saying calmly, without a single raised word, and I'd said it in a way that let the truth do the work instead of my anger. Vanessa looked at Ryan for a long moment across the table, her expression somewhere between confusion and something colder. Gerald Whitfield's smile had gone stiff, the kind of smile a man wears when a business deal has quietly gone sideways in front of his guests. I didn't feel triumphant watching it. I mostly just felt tired, the way you feel after finally setting down something heavy you'd been carrying for months without realizing how much it weighed. I left before the cake was cut. Nobody stopped me at the door. The weeks after the wedding were quiet. Ryan didn't call. Donna told me Vanessa had confronted him the very night of the wedding, in the car on the way to the airport for their honeymoon, having overheard enough of the toast and enough hallway whispering afterward to demand the whole story. I didn't ask for details. It wasn't my business to know what happened between a husband and wife behind closed doors, even if that husband was my own son. Then, about a month later, he showed up at my job site on a Tuesday afternoon, still in his work clothes from the engineering firm, standing awkwardly near a stack of lumber while I checked measurements with Tyler. "Can we talk?" he asked. We sat on the tailgate of my truck. He didn't defend himself right away. He just sat there a long time. "I read the email Walter must have shown you," he finally said. "Vanessa found the whole thing on my laptop before you even said anything at the wedding. She confronted me weeks ago. She was furious with me, Dad, more than you probably were." I didn't say anything. I let him keep going. "I think I've spent so long trying to prove I wasn't just a contractor's kid that I turned you into something to be embarrassed about instead of something to be proud of. And then when I got scared you might actually be hurt enough to change things, instead of coming to you like a man, I went around you. That's on me. All of it." I looked at my son for a long moment, the boy who used to ride on my shoulders at job sites, who used to beg me to let him hammer nails into scrap wood. "You know what the worst part was for me, Ryan? It wasn't the toast. People say dumb things when they're trying to impress a room. I could have let that go eventually. It was the email. That told me you didn't think you could just talk to me, that you thought the safest way to protect yourself from your own father was through a stranger with a law degree instead of a phone call." "I know," he said, and his voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since he was 14. "I don't have a good excuse. I got scared and scared people do stupid things, and I did a stupid thing." "I'm not going to pretend that didn't cut deep, Ryan," I told him. "It did. Worse than the toast, honestly. But I didn't build my whole life around punishing people who hurt me. I built it around showing up anyway. You want back into this family the right way, you know where the job site is. 3 years, same as anyone. No shortcuts and no more phone calls to lawyers behind my back." He nodded, and for the first time in a long while, he looked like my son again instead of a stranger in an expensive jacket. Megan came around slower. She wrote me a long letter that winter, apologizing for standing silent at that party, admitting she'd been more afraid of Preston's family judging her than of hurting me. She wrote that watching Ryan's face at the wedding, watching what the truth actually looked like once it was out in the open, made her realize how small she'd let herself become in rooms full of people who'd never once picked up a hammer in their lives. I appreciated the honesty more than I let on. I wrote her back a short letter of my own, telling her that the door had never actually closed. She'd just been afraid to knock on it. We had dinner together that Christmas, the first real family dinner since Carol passed that felt like it used to. Minus one empty chair, we still set a place for out of habit. Megan brought a pie she'd clearly struggled with, slightly burnt at the edges, and I told her it was the best pie I'd had in years because it was true in every way that mattered. Preston came with her that Christmas, quieter than I'd seen him at the engagement party, and at one point in the evening he pulled me aside near the garage while I was checking on a space heater. "Mr. Doyle, I want you to know I never agreed with how that night went. I didn't say anything at the time, and that was wrong of me. I should have." I appreciated him saying it, even if it came 6 months late. I told him that most people find their courage after the moment's already passed, and the ones worth keeping around are the ones who at least come back to say so. He nodded like he understood exactly what I meant, and later that spring he asked me, without Megan prompting him, if I'd teach him how to change the oil on his own car instead of paying someone else to do it. I think that request meant more to me than he probably realized. Donna cried at that Christmas dinner, right in the middle of clearing plates, and when I asked her what was wrong, she said nothing was wrong at all. She said it was the first time in over a year the whole family had sat around one table without something sharp hanging in the air, and she hadn't realized how much she'd missed it until it was back. As for Ryan, he didn't join the company right away. Vanessa's family had other plans for him, and old habits don't disappear overnight. But he calls me now, every couple of weeks, and last spring he showed up on a Saturday, stood next to Tyler and me, and asked if I'd teach him how to properly hang a door, something I'd offered to teach him 100 times when he was 17 and never once wanted to learn. I watched him struggle with the level, adjusting the hinges with hands that had never done real work before, and something in my chest that had been closed for a long time opened back up, just a little. Tyler, without me asking, walked him through it patiently, the same way I'd once walked Tyler through his first crooked cut. Watching the two of them work side by side, my son and a boy who'd never had a father until he found his way into my garage, I thought maybe this was what Carol had meant, all those years ago, about building something that would still be standing after I was gone. I'm not going to tell you this story ends with some perfect Hollywood reunion. It doesn't. My son and I are still rebuilding something that took one bad night to crack. Gerald Whitfield and I have never spoken since the wedding, and I don't expect we ever will, and that's all right with me. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt, and I've made peace with that. Some nights I still sit on that same back porch with a coffee I let go cold, and I think about how close I came to letting anger make my decisions for me. It would have been easy. Easier, maybe, than what I actually did. I could have cut Ryan off completely the night of that email. I could have changed the will out of spite just to feel like I'd won something. But winning was never really the point, and I think that's the thing men forget the most when they've been hurt by their own blood. Justice isn't about making someone else feel as small as they made you feel. It's about standing in your own truth so clearly that nobody in the room can argue with it, including the person who hurt you. But I learned something that year that I think matters more than any toast, any wedding, any glass building downtown with somebody's name on it in steel letters. A man's worth was never in what people called him at a party. It was in what he built, quietly, with his own two hands, long after everyone stopped watching. And sometimes the most powerful thing a father can do isn't raise his voice. It's simply telling the truth once clearly, and then walking back to work. If this story meant something to you, don't forget to like, subscribe to Raw Revenge, and tell me where you're watching from. I'll see you in the next story.